On to 14.3, I know this was announced earlier, but just in case anybody has come in late, the public hearing on Emerald Isle will not be held tonight. That is continued to a date to be determined. Mr. McGlynn, 14.3.
Item 14.3, report City of Santa Rosa revenue ballot measures for affordable housing and general city services. Alan Alton, Deputy Director of Finance, presenting.
Mayor Corsi and members of the City Council, the item before you now is the ballot measures that we are proposing to go on the November ballot. The way that we'll work this, we have 3 items contained in this staff report, in this presentation. So the first 2 are the sales tax, the proposed sales tax increase and a proposed transient occupancy tax increase. I'll take care of those 2 items and then I'll turn it over to Dave Gwine, who will finish up with the housing bond item. I do also want to note that we have some consultants here that have helped us through this. We have Chris Lynch, who's our bond counsel, Charles Heath, and Brian Godby, who performed the opinion survey for us. So as a bit of background, the city has been looking at a number of revenue measures to help various city operations and community unmet needs. We have, in May, we did a opinion survey seeking polling on both a sales tax increase of 1/4 cent, a TOT increase of 5%, and a housing and infrastructure bond, and we presented that information to you in our in a June 26 regular meeting. The council then requested that staff and the opinion research company go back and do a second poll where we remove the infrastructure part of the housing bond item and pulled for a number of different rates that would that could be affected by it, because as you recall, what we're looking at is a general obligation bond, and there were several property tax ad valorem rate increases that would go could go along with it that would return different project dollar amounts. So the context for us looking at the general fund revenue measures is that, as you know, we currently have a structural deficit in the general fund. We adopted our fiscal year 18-19 budget with an approximately $14.9 million deficit. That deficit is ongoing through the 10 years of our forecast. So as we look at items or things that will help us close the gap within that of that deficit, revenue and expenditure reductions are both needed in order to move forward. So we looked at a sales tax increase and, like I said, the TOT increase. So currently what we have is our sales tax rate is 8.625%. We have two add-ons that make up part of that. One is Measure O, which is a special tax for public safety and violence prevention services. And then the second one is what we call Measure N. This was a general quarter-cent sales tax add-on. This was originally approved by the voters in 2010, and then it was extended by the voters in 2016. So when we did the initial polling in May, the survey came back that there was a 66.1% approval for doing a quarter-cent general sales tax increase. So we have rates that throughout Sonoma County, this comparable sales tax rates. I do want to point out that the one for Sebastopol is incorrect. Theirs is 8.875%. So where we are right now at 8.625 is the same as Healdsburg and Rohnert Park and Sonoma. The others are at 8.125%, with the exception of Katati, which is at 9.125%. So we propose to increase the sales tax by a quarter%, and that would bring our total rate up to 8.875%, so we would be equal with Sebastopol. It is a 6-year measure that's being proposed, so it is of a finite period and would go away unless extended by the voters at March 31st of 2025. So being a general tax increase, this money would go into the general fund and would be used for general purposes. So that could be used really for anything. It will help fund all city programs, especially those as we look to rebuild and recover from the fires, but also just provide essential city services that are in the Parks Department and out in street repairs and those things. And it would provide approximately $9 million annually of additional revenue to the general fund, again, during that period. So moving on from that, unless there are any questions, the transient occupancy tax.
Let's just check, Alan.
Yeah,
please.
sure.
Any questions at this point?
All right.
Oops, Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Alan. On slide 3, you mentioned Measure O and Measure N. When do each of those expire?
Right. So Measure O expires in 2025, so March 31st, 2025, and Measure N expires on March 31st of 2027.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead and proceed, Alan.
Sure. So transient occupancy tax increase. So this is, and it was mentioned in our earlier item, but this is a rate that's charged to guests of hotels and motels and short-term rental areas. Our current base TOT rate is 9%, and we generated, for 18-19, we're estimating about $5.3 million of revenue to the general fund. The current amount, or the current 9% rate, was set in 1994. It went into effect in January 1st of 94. And this was also included in the May opinion survey, and that had a 65% favorable approval, but that was actually to increase it 5%. Since then, we felt that from a base TOT standpoint, we should maybe go more toward the middle of the pack instead of the front of the pack. So we went with a 3% increase, which would bring us to 12%. And this chart shows you about where that would line up. Now, when you include the BIAs, our current rate plus our 2 BIAs is at 14%. So if we add 3% onto that, that is going to bring us up to the top if you include the BIAs. From a base TOT standpoint of funds that will go into the general fund, however, this will put us right pretty much in the middle of the pack. So again, we are proposing to go from 9% to 12%. The estimated revenue that would come in from this would be about $1.5 million. I mentioned that it would raise our effective total TOT plus tax assessments up 17% and put us in line with Windsor, Rohnert Park, and Sonoma County. This is an ongoing source of revenue, so there isn't a sunset at the end. This would go on until future change is made. This, as the sales tax increase, though, would be for general purposes. It is general fund revenue that would come in and that would go toward closing the gap for our structural deficit. So with that, if you have any questions on those two items, I'm free to answer that, and then we'll bring Dave up.
Thanks, and I apologize. I had to step out for a while earlier, and I know there was a discussion about the BIA, but can you explain a little bit of the history and the thinking behind Santa Rosa being the only jurisdiction in the county that has 2 BIA fees?
Hold on. Excellent. Race is still here.
All right. Admittedly, I heard there's a question about BIA, but I didn't hear what the question is.
I asked for a little bit of history of why and an explanation of why we're the only jurisdiction with 2 BIA fees.
Okay, so the Sonoma County Tourism BIA pre-existed, came before the 2010 Santa Rosa BIA. So we had already agreed to participate as a city in the Sonoma County BIA. I don't recall off the top of my head when that one came into existence. It came into existence in 2005. In 2010, we pursued, or the hotels asked us to pursue the local assessment, the Santa Rosa TBIA, in response to the reduction of support that we gave to the Visit Santa Rosa program through our general fund. So they decided to self-assess, and at that time, that was the best answer we had to be able to keep our Welcome Center and visitor programs. And that was again in 2010.
And is there no overlap between these two?
There's coordination, but no, the funds are completely separate. The markets that they both go after are coordinated and separate so that we have a broader reach.
All right. I may have more questions about that later on. Thank you. Any other questions on this? Ms. Combs?
Following up on that, can you clarify for me, if we were to make a change in the 2% Sonoma County TBIA, would it be, she may or may not need, does that require voter approval to reduce or change how we use the 2% Sonoma County TBIA?
Well, I can say that we either participate or do not participate, but we do not have a say on how Sonoma County Tourism uses those funds.
I guess I'm asking, in order to keep our total tax assessment the same, if we were to make a change in the 2%, would we need to do that through a ballot measure?
Not through a ballot measure, no.
Thank you. I'm not saying I'm going to do that. I'm just asking. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? All right, back to Mr. Alton. Or actually, you're switching with Mr. Gwine.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Corsi, members of the council. So I'll walk us through the outline of the proposed housing recovery bond. First, by way of background, in 2016, you adopted your housing action plan, which had a directive in there, amongst many others, to explore the feasibility of a housing bond. In 2017, the council voted its support for some state housing measures that were being proposed. And just last month, we directed staff to return with a housing recovery bond ballot measure for the November 6th general election. In terms of an analysis, a reminder that the Association of Bay Area Governments provides regional housing needs assessment for Santa Rosa in that time frame described as over 5,000 units. The Santa Rosa Housing Trust has an active what we call pipeline of pending housing units and developments, and we anticipate the 400 current units would increase with the addition of this solicitation. And I wanted to make the point that the Housing Authority already has an administrative system in place to move the money forward. I would say it's a plug and play. It would, if you so support this and it gets passed, it would be included with the other resources they administer. So as Alan mentioned, there was a recent update polling. I try to summarize the four levy measures that were polled, and we list what the project, how that would translate into funds for projects, and summarize what the poll shows as total for yes votes. There is one typo on the levy for $49. That's an upside down 6. It's actually 46.7%. In terms of expenditures, it would be used for acquisition, rehab, preservation, or construction of affordable housing developments. It could become in the form of loans and grants. Certainly the Housing Authority recommends low-interest loans for those purposes. And for the cost to administer the program, it would be city staff performing the work necessary and incidental to the bond projects. Proposed priorities for the bond would be to provide financial assistance to those who lost their homes in the disaster, down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. It could be used to preserve affordable housing that has expiring covenants. It would provide housing for households at or below 80% of the area median income, so working families, senior, veterans, etc. And of course, it would be a resource to provide permanent supportive housing to serve homeless populations. The attachment to your staff report has been developed by a group that's been working on this bond for some time, the proposed public benefit goals. And I admit that as staff, this is a conversation that's still occurring in the community, but as the date of publication, the idea was that for developments that sponsored 8 units or more, it would require prevailing wage and a solicitation of union apprentices and journeymen at 30% of the construction work offered. The trade solicitation would be prioritized in bidding as a good faith effort, but if it could not be met, there would be no delay in construction. There's a preference for LEED certified developments, climate smart, net zero all electric construction standards, and if the other financing that comes in to support that particular development, if it conflicts with these policies, a waiver would be sought. Here's how the proposed split in the funding. 75% of the bond revenue would serve folks at or below 80% of the area median income. That is $78,550 for a family of 4. So contemplates rental housing, permanent supportive housing, manufactured home, and accessory dwelling units. And then 25% of the bond revenue could serve households up to 120% of area median income, shown there at $100,900. That would be for home ownership, low interest financing for rebuilding, down payment assistance. It could be for manufactured home repair or replacement. The resolution contemplates an oversight committee. That was when it was considered for countywide. It is up to the council's discretion if you think your oversight, that of the housing authority, the audits of the housing authority, and the audits of the city would provide enough oversight and assurance for the voters. But I do point out that your bond language and resolution currently calls for an oversight committee. Funding with affordable housing via Santa Rosa Housing Trust, I mentioned that. We anticipate it would be what we see in our past. It would lever between 3 and 4 times the amount of resources from federal, state, and private capital. And project selection would be per the current housing trust policies. The administrative guide examples include development readiness, the depth of affordability, the credibility of the developer, the selection of the property manager, proximity to transit, all of those details. And here is the ballot language that is in draft form, pending your selection of a levy amount to provide affordable housing for low and middle income families, veterans, seniors, disabled, and other vulnerable populations. Supportive housing for the homeless that offers mental health, substance abuse services, and help low and middle income households purchase home in their communities. Shall the City of Santa Rosa's measure to issue of assessed value through final maturity with citizen oversight and audits be adopted. So there's 3 recommendations in front of you this evening. The first is to introduce an ordinance to add Chapter 3-29 to the City Code to establish a temporary 25% quarter-cent sales tax for a period of 6 years for general city services, and by resolution order the submission of a ballot measure to seek voter approval of the ordinance at the November 6, 2018 general municipal election and direct related actions. The second recommendation is to introduce an ordinance to amend Section 3-28.020 to the City Code to increase the transit occupancy tax by 3%, from 9% up to 12%, and by resolution order the submission of a ballot measure to seek voter approval of the ordinance at the November 6, 2018 general municipal election and direct related actions. And then lastly, select a levy amount and introduce an ordinance to amend Chapter 4-40 of the City Code to authorize the issuance of a general obligation bond for the purpose of funding affordable housing, and, by resolution, order the submission of a ballot measure to seek voter approval of the ordinance at the November 6, 2018 general municipal election, direct related actions to place an ad valorem property tax on properties within the city limits. It is further recommended that the council consider setting the levy at a rate between $19 and $49 per every $100,000 of assessed value. And staff also seeks direction on your thoughts about language regarding agreements with labor organizations and the Oversight Committee. That concludes our presentation. We would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gwine. And I do want to back up and see if there are any questions from the council on the housing bond presentation. Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to move back to slide 18. The top 2 bullets speak to apprentices and journeymen, and it's under public benefit goals. Could someone please explain to me the public benefit of those 2 top bullets?
Yeah, that was a component of the attached guidelines that was developed by the group working on the bond over the last few months. I would say, and maybe there's some speakers in the audience that could better answer your question, council member, but that interest, I think, was to pay the workers that are building these units a wage that would perhaps allow them to rent them and or live in them, and that it was encouraging to create apprentices and job trades in this area because of the demand for labor to rebuild our community.
And if I could just add to that, the document that's with the agenda packet was developed by a committee of stakeholders over a number of months, and that heading of public benefit was lifted straight out of that document. I don't expect the staff to defend the.
Okay. What I see here is what's going to happen is there's going to be an increase in costs, and that's my concern, and that seems to follow this kind of endeavor, and it does give me pause. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions, Mr. Gwine. I think that it's important to point out that this is that at whatever rate we decide to set this at between 19 and 49, that this is it's per $100,000 of assessed value and not resale value. So do you know what the average assessed value of a home in Santa Rosa is?
Yeah, the staff looked that up. It's roughly $349,000.
Okay. So it's about half of what the median price of a home is if you're buying it today.
It's a good point. Yeah, assessed value is not the sales price value of a property.
All right. And this, the presentation didn't mention inclusionary situations. Could this bond money be used to create affordable housing within a market rate project?
I believe it could, yes. There's several ways to do that. There's the density increase. The current policy is that if a developer wants additional units, the increase on density, it should not require a subsidy from the housing authority unless they're lowering the affordability deeper than just 80% of median. But if they wanted to see if we can't, for lack of a better term, purchase affordability within a market rate development, yes, I think this bond measure could help.
And then my final question is, it's been pointed out by a couple of folks to me in the last couple of weeks that the average city contribution to an affordable unit is about $100,000. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we see a range of between $100,000 to $130,000 because costs are going up. Okay. But typically, it's about a quarter to a third of the cost. It comes from local match.
All right. So we're obviously expecting that this money will generate other money to create affordable housing.
Correct.
And if that $100,000 figure stayed true, $100 million of bond money would create about 1,000 units. Is that math correct?
That's correct. The way affordable housing is financed is you first have to have a willing developer property, but also local match, because then you can proceed to pursue tax credits, project-based bonding, state grants, et cetera.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So actually, since we made a determination a couple of weeks ago related to dropping infrastructure from the bond conversation, I've had a number of folks reach out to me concerned about both promises that have been made by the city in the past over addressing infrastructure, as well as the updated polling showing that when we pulled infrastructure out of it, that the polling actually dropped from being close to passing to not being so close to passing. Can you talk a little bit about if there have been conversations in the past about infrastructure, how those might have played into this conversation, and in particular, how infrastructure costs could still help projects move forward?
I understand your question. I don't know if I'm the best one to respond to that. The polling.
So
polling question?
I'm actually not sure I understand the question. So I'm trying to, we can talk about what, I would say the pollsters here can talk about the variation between the two polling numbers. I would still say that it probably begs more questions than it answers. I'm not sure how to answer something that is about some, unless there's a specific reference point to some infrastructure promise, I'm not sure how to answer that particular question. There's been no promise made. We try to deal with our infrastructure issues, and as council has seen, there's some challenges facing infrastructure. But, the measure was simply a question. As we stated back on June 26th, it was being done at that point because it looked like there was going to be a county-wide initiative, and if timing had been different, we probably would have asked a different question, which I believe led council to ask a more focused question around housing only. So I can't answer the promise question because I'm not sure I understand it, but if you want a polling response, we can bring the pollster up and they can talk about it.
How about I will listen to the public comment and ask that the public weigh in on whether infrastructure is a vital component of trying to get this passed, and then ask my colleagues to consider whether or not we want to continue with that direction of just doing the affordable housing without the infrastructure component to it.
Understood.
Mr. Swedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave, going to slide 19, the 75% bond revenue. One of the categories there that I think is our biggest need of this community is permanent supportive housing. I also realize on our housing action plan, we have SROs as one of them. And to date, we have not developed any SROs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what would your thoughts be about how would we incentivize within the framework that's being proposed here so that a developer actually would create some permanent supportive housing, which, again, in my opinion, is our greatest need in this community?
I would recommend that as we develop the criteria for the Notice of Funding Availability, NOFA, that we assign a point system so that an application would score higher if the developer were providing those units.
And would that be sometime after this, if it goes to the voters, after it passes? When is the NOFA developed?
Oh, yeah. First would have to be passed by the voters, resources received, agreement on the guidelines by which we administer the program.
So any of those NOFAs would come back to the council at the time?
It is your call. If this is going through the Housing Authority, you could provide the direction to them as well.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you. I'm eager to hear what the public has to say on this, but before we go forward, we have in front of us an option A with whereases and an option B with whereases. Can you clarify the difference between the option A and the option B? I think before the public comments, they should know what we have in front of us to ask those questions about.
I'm happy to explain the presence of those two options. This is a result of state law. It all has to do with the way the ballot language is written. And there was a recent state law that required certain components be in the ballot language that makes the language a little bit awkward. And if I can pull that up, there is an effort to adopt new resolution that would revise that provision so as to allow local jurisdiction to have what you might call a cleaner ballot statement, a little less confusing. We don't know yet whether that will pass. It did not pass earlier in the session, but there is some expectation that with legislature back from recess that this may indeed get passed and signed within the next couple of weeks, week or two. So it was working with bond counsel, recommended that we go ahead and prepare two resolutions, A, which complies with the current law and has a slightly more awkward statement, and option B, which has a slightly clearer statement that complies should the legislation pass and be adopted. And we would recommend that you adopt, if you want to move forward with this, that you adopt both of those resolutions and that it be conditioned on which law is in effect at the end of the session. I'm sorry, which law is in effect as of August 10th.
August 10th.
And both get us to the same result, just with different wording.
Yes, both get to the same result.
Okay, and attached to each of those would be the same ordinance.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and we just received a new red line ordinance version. Just for clarification, and it includes some of the language that we've seen on the PowerPoint, but that hadn't been in the packet that was publicized.
That's correct. And if I may put that in context, there are several of the slides, and it would be, if I go back to slide 16, that is what is in the ordinance, as currently drafted. This is what is actually authorized for expenditures. The next several slides, 17, 18, and 19, are what staff proposes for implementation of the bond. And one possibility for the council is to adopt these elements in these three slides as a guidance document, a separate guidance document that you adopt by resolution. We had the request that the labor provisions, the prevailing wage and solicitation of union apprentices and journeymen, be incorporated into the ordinance itself so that it becomes part of the voter-approved bond measure, and then can only be changed, of course, by voter approval in the future. So that alternative language is before you now, and I understand it is also available to the public. The other element that's included in that language that is not in this slide is a reference to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act.
Is that slide 17?
It is not on either slide. It is only in your red line, the reference to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. But if it were going to be on a slide, it would have been on 18.
18, thank
yes.
you. Okay.
For clarity, we now have option A, option B, and option red line.
You have, there are two documents that you'll be considering if you move forward with the housing bond. There are the two, at the end of the day, you'll need a resolution and an ordinance.
Right.
The resolution, you have two versions.
Okay.
The ordinance, now you also have two versions. You have the version that was presented to you originally in the packet, and you now have a red line version that would incorporate the labor provisions into the ordinance itself.
So the ordinance with the red line is an alternative to the one that was in the packet.
Yes.
It's not a replacement.
That's correct.
All right.
And I think the resolution red lines are, there were four documents. There was the resolution A and the red line A. I don't think we need to look at the ones that aren't red line, if I may suggest.
If I'm right, if I may, and I should have inserted myself earlier in the conversation. Earlier today, we provided you, it's going to get a little confusing, but earlier today, we provided you with red lines that were corrections to some omissions in the original resolutions. So on the housing bond resolutions, it was simply a red line that added a reference to federal funding, leveraging federal funding. So it was leveraging state and federal funding rather than state and county funding. That was just almost a typographical type of correction, not a substantive. On the two tax measures, the TOT and the sales tax, there was a red line in order to conform the ballot language with state law requirements. So it added the anticipated revenue from the tax and the term of the tax in both cases. So that, again, not a substantive change, but just a change to conform the language to state law requirements. And now you have yet another red line, which is an alternative, which just provides you an option that we've provided at the request of a council member. So,
thank you. And welcome to the sausage factory, folks. This is how it's done.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I just wanted to muddy the water that way.
Okay. Any other questions? So before we get started with public comment, is there anyone who plans to offer some public comment who hasn't turned in a yellow card? Okay, so I've got 25 cards here, which is about 75 minutes if everybody goes without any pause in between. You'll have 3 minutes to make your case. I encourage you to do it in less than that. I guarantee you that you can be effective in less than 3 minutes, and you'll probably be better heard if you take less than 3 minutes. Also, as you begin your public comment, please let us know if you're talking to the transit occupancy tax, the sales tax, the housing bond, or more than one of those. We'll start with Charles Metz, followed by Peter Rumble. Sorry? All right, Peter Rumble, followed by Chris Grable.
Good evening, council members. Peter Rumble, Santa Rosa Metro Chamber. I am speaking to all three of the proposed revenue measures, all options therein. I do want to say that our Advocacy Council hasn't formally considered any of these options yet, waiting to see what your council decides to move forward. So we have had some conversations at our executive committee as well as our board level. And so I just want to frame the comments that they're not an official endorsement or opposition to any, but general advice from our perspective as an organization. And that is to pick a priority. If housing is our greatest priority and your greatest priority as a council, I think that you are well served by moving forward on that priority. Now, again, that is notwithstanding the specific considerations within a bond if you decide to move forward, and we'll need to consider all of those before we can make a formal decision on how to weigh in. But we really do encourage you to move forward with a priority, or not move forward with any measure for that matter if you can't agree. Regarding the TOT in particular, please do proceed with caution and deliberation, looking at all of the various components of taxes. And we heard earlier about the great economic engine that is tourism. You saw the data, and as we look at that cumulatively, we want to be sure that we're not sort of cooking the golden goose, so to speak. And we also want to make sure that we consider what business comes in through our hotels, and it might not necessarily affect tourism to a significant degree, but it could very well impact the large business that comes in through conventions, as well as our large employers who book hundreds of rooms at a time. So any increase is a significant increase in that. So please do consider the cumulative impact, even if you move forward with a very modest increase. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris Grable, followed by Scott Wagner.
Hi, my name is Chris Grable. I'm co-chair of the campaign for the Santa Rosa Housing Recovery Bond. I just wanted to thank every member of the council for giving such attention and depth to this matter and housing specifically over the last year. I know how difficult it has been, and I can't imagine what it's been like to be in your shoes. My My first point would be the heart of our mutual endeavor that we've put hundreds of hours into collectively, bringing together every possible group and constituency and stakeholder in this city. The heart of the endeavor really is recovery, and I would like to see that in the ballot statement. I don't see it in the ballot statement. It is significant, given that our poll in February was a 73% positive yes, based on the poll that we did with EMC. That was very, very well done poll. It's not a trifling matter. This is about recovery, and that is really the heart of the mutual endeavor. So I want to make sure that's in there. I can't emphasize enough what a good investment this would be for our city. It comes out to about $2 or $3 a week for your average homeowner. And for that input, the investment I think would be huge for housing, our workforce, our teachers, our homeless, and it would really show proactive engagement with this issue. We're all in it together. We can all help a little bit and see some serious gains. The housing bond is not the only tool to do this, but it is one that is really, really significant and would help quite a bit, especially with the matches that are actually upwards of 9 times in the case of Santa Clara. So if you take that 125 to 160 million in the $29 to $39 range, of that $2 to $3 a week, that actually multiplies, closer to $1 billion in some cases. So really take that to heart. It's a significant investment. It's necessary. There are a lot of folks involved in building housing right now, and there's a lot of different ways to get housing built. It would just be so critically important for us to have this tool at our disposal to be able to build that many more units for people who are in such need, inclusionary, for homeless folks, for our workforce. It really is a critical moment, and we've been fearful of what is to come, and we're all losing a lot of friends and family and folks we know to economic displacement, specifically related to housing. And it would just be so nice to have something to look forward to, something that shows we're taking action, that we have a future that we can really look to for opportunity for all and housing for all. So thank you to the entire council.
Thank you. Scott Wagner, followed by Tiffany Wong. Scott, Tiffany. And Tiffany will be followed by Bryce Dow Williamson.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. My name is Tiffany Wong, and I am the EAH's Advocacy Coordinator. I would like to read to you thank you. I would like to read to you a story from longtime Sonoma County resident Sally Nichols. She writes, I have been a resident of Sonoma County for many years. I have birthed and raised my children in this county. When I lost my home due to the real estate crash in 2012, I was lucky enough to have a moldy old RV that was welcomed onto a floodable property. The only thing that got me through those rough 5 years was my incredible extended family in Sonoma County. In January of 2017, I was unable to move the RV and it flooded to hip high. By the grace of God, I was able to move into EAH Kings Valley Apartments in Cloverdale. Finally, I was finally living in a safe, sanitary, and dry apartment that I can call my own. With the incredible ongoing benefit of enthusiastic services coordinator, a friendly and helpful office staff, and the miraculous maintenance, I am better than safe. My quality of life has improved to excellent, and I'm finally happy. I thank EAH for making this possible. Affordable housing is nearly impossible to find in Sonoma County. It's so sad to think that as we pass from workers to retired, we will no longer be able to afford to live in our own community. I'm just one of the lucky ones who happened to find quality, affordable housing after years of waiting. Needless to say, we desperately need more affordable housing in our county, a place many of us call home. Santa Rosa please take action. We need safe and affordable housing options for our families, veterans, local workers, older adults, and persons with disabilities. I ask that you will stand in the gap, be that extended family that Sally Nichols has mentioned in her story, and support your community through the Affordable Housing Bond. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bryce Dow Williamson, followed by Lady Vasquez.
Good evening. I'm here on behalf of Jack Tibbetts, reading you a letter sent from the ocean. My friends on the council, I am very sorry to have missed tonight's meeting, and I'm regretful to be missing the housing bond item. Originally, I had expected to arrive in time to participate, but Mother Nature had other plans. Nevertheless, I want to share my opinion with you. I have had the great privilege of serving on this council with you all, working together to continually exchange ideas and perspective to tackle our city's problems. As you know, two of our largest problems, housing and homelessness, are intractable with the resources we currently have at hand. No amount of ingenuity or creative policy making will make a broad enough impact that the public will notice. What's more, every poll has been conducted in the past year all indicate that these two issues are the highest priorities among the public as well. Through the passage of other Bay Area housing bonds, we now know that local housing bonds can produce the resources we need to meaningfully tackle these problems on a large scale. In the case of Alameda County, which has passed a $580 million bond in 2016, that has already issued $79 million to projects, which has resulted in leveraging of $670 million additional dollars to their local projects through state and federal funding pools. And this $79 million amount alone is anticipated to create over 1,000 new units of affordable housing. Creating these units is clearly a public priority in Santa Rosa, and we have identified a powerful tool to tackle our growing housing crisis. What we need to do now is to present the policy tool to the voters and to let them vote by their values. I think Santa Rosa will vote based on compassion and common sense and pass this measure. But win or lose, we need to present this tool to them for decision. I look forward to getting back and seeing you all in August. In the meantime, I support the $29 threshold. Based on the 3 separate polls I have seen, this is feasible, and the $124 million it will generate is much needed. This amount should be based on a declining repayment schedule as city property taxes rise, so that the taxpayer notices a smaller amount on their tax roll every year. My best, Jack. On a personal note, as somebody who was born in Santa Rosa, who attended the JC and lives in Santa Rosa at 32 with my own business and is also sharing a house with 4 other people, I sure would love it if we could get the chance to create this housing bond and see. And I think that you would really see the way that young people will get behind this, and I'm going to be working very hard to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. And did that message from Mr. Tibbetts wash up on the beach in a bottle?
Something like that, yes, in my phone.
Lady Vasquez, followed by Mayor Mansell.
Hello, my name is Lady Vasquez. I am here for the Housing Recovery Bond. I am an alumni at Roseland University Prep and incoming freshman at the Santa Rosa Junior College. I actually wanted to come here and speak a little bit about myself, selfishly. I came to Santa Rosa when I was 5 years old from San Jose, California, and I can tell you that being here has been a lot of ups and downs. My family for many years did not have enough money to afford to live in even a low-income apartment. For the first 12 years of my life, I lived in an apartment on Sunset Avenue that I had to share with 2 other families, and it was only a 2-bedroom apartment, and it was a lot of it wasn't fun. I can tell you that, but I've seen how my family struggled to pay rent and make even $500 for just 1 month of rent, and I now understand that struggle because I am going into the Santa Rosa Junior College and I want to live on my own, but I can't do that because there's not really any place here that offers me the help I need. as a DACA recipient and as a, incoming freshman, my only option is just to kind of stay with my parents and live with them until I can transfer out of the Santa Rosa Junior College and move into a four-year university. I love Santa Rosa as if I was born here, and if like any other citizen here, I would ask for this. I'm so sorry. I just like any other person here, I've loved and cared for this city, and I hope that you guys, like Jack said, can make this choice out of compassion for the people who are suffering with the economic problems and can't afford to live in and who can't afford to live in a house like a decent home here. So yeah, I don't know, I can just tell you from my experience that this is very important, and thank you so much for taking your time with this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Vasquez, and keep striving. Mayor Mansell, visiting from Healdsburg.
Yeah, I'm coming tonight as an employee of the Santa Rosa City Schools. I'm a teacher in Santa Rosa City, and I've been teaching for 36 years, and I'm used to coming in here to talk to the Board of Education. It's the first city council meeting I've ever attended. I've watched on TV. So I want to just thank you, council members. I definitely can empathize in one respect, being on a city council as well, but I do want to just invite you to be bold and to understand that as a teacher, I have read so many pieces of writing and heard so many speeches as a language arts teacher in the high school, public schools of Santa Rosa. Kids are really ready. Young people are ready. You know what we're doing this for. It's about the future. It's about really looking at how we as a city can recover. As an employee and someone who really cares about Santa Rosa, we've seen demonstrated leadership. Everybody knows this last 9 months, you all have shown up, and any criticism and these boundaries that are literally and figuratively brought up, we're all in here because we care. We don't come here other than the fact that we know we need to serve the public, and the public right now needs bold leadership. It needs to deal with recovery, and I think words do matter, language does matter. I would echo the term recovery would help this as a focus when people look at ballot. I do believe in education. It's been my vocation, and I do think our voters in Santa Rosa City, and I think the county actually could have pulled this off. If you educate people with everything we've been through, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, there's so many levels that we can improve on right now, and this housing issue is not anything but the front burner. And I hope that tonight you can adopt and really come together and be the leaders that you've already been. I've looked to you many times after the fires and even before, some of you, and I really want to just echo that this is the time now, and we need to be bold, and our citizens are willing to help, and landowners can be asked. Parents, teachers, we're always asking, and we can ask, and that's what we're asking you to do, is give the voters a chance to be asked with good education to support something that's absolutely at the front burner right now. So I just want to thank you so much. And remember, gratitude is definitely out here. We appreciate what you're doing, and the people that are advocating for housing really value what you're going to do tonight, which is do the right thing, trust your populace, and know that education is the foundation, and the future of our city is based on this decision tonight. So thank you for helping, and definitely for listening to so many people tonight. Thank you, and I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Mayor. Joe Holcomb, followed by Jacqueline Ortiz.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Joe Holcomb. I live over on Martina on the far side. I'm going to address all three items, try to be as brief as I can on the issue. I was here in 2010 to address the City Council regarding raising the sales tax on what was called Measure N at the time. I said that we should do it. I thought it was a good idea, but you went ahead and spent the money and had your polling, and we went ahead and passed it anyway. As far as the sales tax, it's probably the easiest one to pass. And if you're going to have money for the revenue for the city, I suggest you look at exactly how much revenue you need, because a quarter cent may not cut it. You may need more than that. So if you're going to ask for money, get what you need. Don't come back to us again. We're tired of seeing this stuff. Next item, the occupancy tax. I think most of us don't care because we don't rent hotels, so it's not going to hurt us. But that's $5.3 million that's going to come out of those visitors that was going to get spent in the economy, not going to get spent. It's also inflationary. So as it goes up, everything else goes up. Keep that in mind. Same with the sales tax. As far as the bond goes, the housing bond, I'm a little bit split because I'm a homeowner. I also have a granny unit in the back that I rent out. I just handed my granny unit a letter that says, your rent's going up. It's going up because water's going up. It's going up because recology's on, garbage is going up. Now you're going to add more taxes. Have you guys looked at our bonds? It never ends. Our taxes are going up. It never ends. This is inflationary. And guess what? We pass it through. So now renters are going to be looking at a pass-through of all these taxes. And we're going to be giving money away so that people can buy new affordable homes. That's wonderful. That's great. I understand the emotion involved. But let's be realistic. Homes are $700,000 now. How much money are you going to give away to help them buy a home? $100,000? $200,000? That's a drop in the bucket. When does it end? How much more money are we going to get into debt on? And I just say this. I might vote yes on the sales tax. I might vote yes on the occupancy tax. I might vote yes on the bond. Right now, it's a no on all three. And I think you understand how inflationary these things are, and we're dealing with a time where it's all shifting underneath us. And these forces are coming down on us from the top, the federal government, the state government, the global world. This economic world is greater than just this little city. So I hope you understand that we just have a small part to play. And if you want to, tax us up again, you're going to see a pass-through. And that pass-through is going to suck money out of the rest of the economy. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Jacqueline Ortiz, followed by Vicki McCammon.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Ortiz. I'm a senior at Roseland University Prep. I've lived in Santa Rosa my whole life. When I was living with my dad before he left us, we have always had trouble with money. When he left us, we were left homeless. So, we went to a family shelter. And there we basically lived in a small house with 5 rooms, and in each room there was families. We all had to share a bathroom, kitchens, living rooms. And now you could hear kids screaming, parents arguing, teens being destructive. For me, this experience was living in a prison. I never went out. I always stayed inside because there were rude people, and I always felt uncomfortable. My family and I shared a bunk bed, four kids and 1 mom. There was no privacy. In addition, we were still tight with money, so all we did was go to school and come back to our room. No family member could visit, and we were always crammed and always stay inside our room. In these types of situations, you don't know who you're living with, so you have to be safe as possible and aware of all times, because anything can happen at any moment. Living where I am now, which is low-income housing, it opens so many opportunities that I never had, not only for me, but for my mom and my siblings. Since we moved into this apartment, my mom was able to get back on her feet and maintain 4 kids without the help of our father, who doesn't even pay child support. Living in low-income housing has allowed my mom to give us everything we need, from feeling safe to being able to get us school materials. My mom now works and goes to school at Santa Rosa JC to learn English. There's no need for my mom or my siblings to be worried about where we are going to live or if we're going to be able to make the rent. I am able to focus on school and my career. I go to high school, and in the summer I've gone to nursing classes, preparing me for my career. These types of apartments allow people like me and my mom to be able to advance in our careers and live a better life than we have ever lived before. There are so many families out there who with low-income housing can change their lives for the better, so they can make something of themselves, so they can accomplish their goals, so they can succeed. To finalize, I would like the mayor, vice mayor, and council members to reconsider the city of Santa Rosa revenue ballot measures for affordable housing and general city services. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. Appreciate you sharing your story. Vicki McCammon, followed by Riley Weissenborn.
Mr. Mayor and the City Councils, good evening. My name is Vicki McCammon, and I'm here to speak to you about the Affordable Housing Bond Measure. I'm a recipient of the Self-Help Sweat Equity Program offered by Burbank Housing. In the late 90s, I was a single mom with 2 kids. When my daughter turned 18, she went to school to JC. I had already gone back to school. Somehow this qualified us for the low-income housing that we were receiving, and we had to leave. I moved to another apartment complex on Hohen. My son went to go stay with his dad, and my daughter moved in with her future husband. Shortly thereafter, I was laid off my job, and I was denied unemployment and had to use my retirement fund to live until I found another job, which I did. I soon graduated from college with my associate's degree in accounting, and I found out about the opportunity of the Self-Help Sweat Equity Program offered through Burbank Housing. I applied for the program, but did not quite make enough money, so I got a part-time job at Kmart and worked in the evenings, so I did qualify for the self-help program. In 2001, 500 families applied for the Self-Help Sweat Equity Ownership Program at Bellevue Ranch in Santa Rosa, near Hearn and Stony Point. 54 of us were ecstatic winners when we spent the next year putting 30 hours a week into building the home that we would soon own. 6 months in, I wondered if it was worth standing out in the middle of the rain building a house. The answer was yeah, it was definitely worth it. Today I call my home the house that Vicki and her kids built. Now I have a sense of security and stability. I'm sure there's a lot more people in Santa Rosa just like me that could benefit from the opportunities like this. There is no other way that I was going to be able to afford a house in Sonoma County. It wasn't in the program. The door wasn't going to open for me. I grew up in this county. I'm a product of the Santa Rosa City Schools. I would have had to have left my hometown, and most importantly, my friends and family. Programs like this are a good opportunity for other people like me, and I hope you take a good look at my story as you consider the measure ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCammon. Riley Weissenborn, followed by Eric Frazier.
Good evening, council members. Mayor Corsi, thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly. I'm Riley Weisenborn with Mid-Penn Housing. I'm a project manager working on the Roseland Village project in the Roseland neighborhood that's just been annexed last November into the city. The housing bond, if approved by the council and the city of Santa Rosa residents, would be an enormous benefit to the project and the community, and would help provide up to 75 units of housing. I think Jackie, who just spoke about her experience and what living in a low-income unit did for her and her family, is extremely important. And I'd like to share one experience that I had with a resident who had moved into a property that we had developed last year. And she was a single mom with 2 kids, and they were living in a domestic abuse shelter for almost 6 months before she received a letter in the mail stating that she got a unit. And I was fortunate enough to be on site when she arrived and got her keys for the first time, and the look on her face is something I'll never forget. It's just one of the many examples of why we need this housing bond approved by you and the residents. I just want to speak to one point that Councilmember Sawyer brought up, his concern about added cost to prevailing wage. Most affordable housing projects are already having to do prevailing wage with other financing and funding sources that they have already. So just wanted to add that point, that it's more likely than not going to be an added expense because it's something that we're already dealing with. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Eric Fraser, followed by Nadine Condon.
Thank you very much, Mayor Corsi. Eric Fraser, speaking as my experience as a home sharing host. And my comments are about the TOT. I have some things to share on that. I do want you to know that overall I do support the housing bond, probably at the $29 level, including infrastructure, but obviously the housing need is incredible. But my comments are about TOT, and I want to make sure that we understand that the TOT has some defects as written, the current law that we have on the books. For instance, there's unintended consequences. The Santa Rosa TOT and BIA ordinances may have created an unfair penalty for our fellow citizens caught up in the emergency. So when they sought shelter and had to be evacuated, they were subjected to this additional tax burden and without exemption, and that's unfair, I believe. Secondly, the current TOT ordinance may be unenforceable because it is too vague. So not only do we have a problem collecting all the TOT funds and BIA funds that the ordinance stipulates, including from guests of tenants who lease for 30 days or more, who have guests that stay for 30 days or less, guests of private property owners, city residents impacted by emergencies, whether they're personal emergencies or whatever, workers assigned that have to be here on a temporary basis are socked with additional taxes, this TOT and BIA taxes. In the information pack that I gave you guys, I posted the definitions in the current law. Number three, the TOT and BIA ordinances are already used for politically divisive rhetoric that has demonized people who share their private property with guests who stay 30 days or less. Number four, the collection of TOT BIA taxes is haphazard and subject to the prejudice that stems from a vaguely worded law. So for instance, Airbnb since 2015 has offered to collect the TOT and BIA taxes on behalf of home sharers, but the city has not signed on to that type of deal. And so that's an example of how you just sort of demonize home sharers without actually getting to the root of just collecting the tax. So number five, anything that stands in the way of making more efficient use of our existing housing stock may be detrimental to people finding long-term housing. And so while that might be counterintuitive to some, it's actually the information is coming forward when it comes to ADUs and JADUs that's the case. There's a bunch of suggestions, certainly having the booking forms collect the TOT and remit it, making the TOT returns compulsory for home sharers, making it optional for those that are home sharing incidentally and not using the booking platforms, for instance, engaging in a public campaign to see that people voluntarily submit BIA and TOT taxes, all to encourage more people to use the unoccupied bedrooms of 36,000 approximately in the city. Thank you very much, Mayor Corsi.
Nadine Condon, followed by Jack Buckhorn.
Good evening, City Council. Thank you for listening so attentively this late in the evening. I am here to support the housing bond. I'm Nadine Condon. I live in Oakmont. I did look at those poll figures, and I read about that in the Press Democrat today, but I really don't believe in political polls ever since Donald Trump got elected president. I support this bond because I think once people know about it, they will actually support it. This is the one thing every single person in Santa Rosa talks about is their affordable housing. I think that this should be a community vote, and this should be taken to the community and let the people speak for themselves. We have an opportunity to really let Santa Rosa set the standard for affordable housing. And I think it's time to just we talk about it and we've talked about it and we've talked about it, but we have a wonderful opportunity now to move ahead. I also think the fact that we can leverage these monies to triple or quadruple the monies we can spend on affordable housing is a golden opportunity that really no resident would want us to miss. So I urge you not to let this opportunity slip away and to put this measure on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Condon. Jack Buckhorn, followed by Brad Calkins.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Corsi, City Council members, and City staff. My name is Jack Buckhorn. I live in Santa Rosa. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the North Bay Labor Council, as well as the Building Trades Council. And I'm here to support the amended red line version of the ordinance, the ballot measure that includes the labor provisions. And let me explain. It's probably obvious why. I am a labor leader, but I'm really just an electrician. I build houses. I learned my trade in an apprenticeship program not more than 1.5 miles from here at the Carpenters Labor Center. And it's provided for me a life that allows me to live in Santa Rosa, to own a home here, to have health care, and to have a pension. And so the question that Councilmember Sawyer asked is a very important one. What is the public benefit of prevailing wage? Well, here it is. This housing bond, if we're lucky enough to pass it, isn't going to solve the housing problem. It's going to help. We also need to raise wages. So the question you need to ask, are you going to reward contractors that can assemble the cheapest, most exploited workforce possible at the lowest cost, or contractors that can produce the highest skilled, most productive, and safest workforce under a prevailing wage? Can those workers afford to live in the houses they're building? That's what prevailing wage means. And prevailing wage is a study, it's a state survey of what the most common wage rate in the area is. That's what prevailing wage. And the gentleman before is absolutely right. You're going to be paying prevailing wage more likely than not because the money that you want to leverage will already required. As a matter of fact, the $4 billion housing bond measure that we're going to vote on in November will give preference to anybody who is paying prevailing wage for those funds. So that's important. The other thing is apprenticeship training. That's how we go into these disadvantaged communities or folks that need a lift up to the middle class. And in Santa Rosa and in the North Bay where these fires happen, according to GoBiz, the governor's business development office, 99.3% of the training of apprentices is done by union joint labor management apprenticeship programs. So if you want to reach into disadvantaged local residents, lift them up into the middle class through building trades jobs, then you would want to support the labor amendments. The Labor Council is on record of supporting this bond measure with prevailing wage, apprenticeship hire, and the ability to bring folks in from our community, local residents, to be able to earn a living and make a wage that allow them to live here in Santa Rosa. So thank you for your consideration of this. We do support the amended red line version with the labor amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Brad Calkins, followed by Mary Dominguez.
Brad Calkins, I'm here to talk about the TOT. I do have some concerns, and I appreciate the report that was shown today. I just want to make sure that there was some misleading information that may be misleading that was out there before Friday. And in the original report, when this was broken into 3 different sections, it talked about the current TOT rate, which is 9%, is below the state average of 9.8. But again, that's not looking at the totals. And the TOT would put us in line with Rohnert Park, Windsor, and Sonoma County. Again, that's TOT only, and that could be misleading because you really need to look at the total taxes, including our BIAs, which was brought up in discussion, and realize that this would put Santa Rosa not only the highest in all of Sonoma County at 17%, but would put us the highest in all of the North Bay. The total of 17 would actually be higher than the cities of San Francisco, Oakland, Santa Clara, San Jose. It would be higher than the totals paid in Marin and Napa cities, all the cities in Marin and Napa. And while I don't think the regular weekend wine taster will make a difference, that business would not be lost. What we have a potential to lose is the Monday through Thursday corporate business and some of the group business. And I say that from experience previously as a hotel general manager. When we're bidding on business for corporate that Monday through Thursday, they ask, and you have to put in your rates, what are the total taxes? Because when you're an Agilent, a Medtronic, a Viavi, or a PG&E, or a Caltrans, you want to know what the total cost is when you're having hundreds or thousands of rooms, because that does make a difference. And so there's a potential to lose some business there, and also the group business. When you're a group person bringing in 100 and some room nights a night, times 4 nights, you want to know what the total is out the door. And my concern is if we are higher than other areas, even simply in Sonoma County right now, if Petaluma is at 12% and Santa Rosa goes to 17%, that's 5% on every $100 of room rate that a meeting planner would look at as the total. And there's a potential to lose that. We could lose it to Paso Robles. Again, they're at 12%, so that is a consideration. So I just ask that you look at the total costs, the total rates, and then also take into consideration there would be some potential lost business. And as mentioned earlier in our report, those groups and meetings also spend money on food and beverage activities and other things and fuel, and you would potentially lose sales tax on that. So just a word of caution to look at all those items when looking at the total taxes, not just the TOT alone.
Thank you. Mary Dominguez, followed by Bill Nickel.
Hello, I'm Mary Dominguez. I actually am a Burbank resident at Papago Court, and I'm here to tell you my story. And I'm also for bond measure, the housing, affordable housing. So back in 2011, I left an abusive relationship, and without Burbank housing, I don't know where I would be. I went to a safe house for a little bit, couldn't really afford anything out in Sonoma County due to it being expensive for a single mother of 3. During the time of me leaving my abusive relationship, I had CPS. My daughter was taken from her father, so I lost custody of my daughter. I lost custody of my 2 sons to CPS due to domestic violence. Not anything that I did wrong other than falling in love with the wrong person at the moment. And let me see. Sorry, it's a little nervous. I didn't know I'd be speaking in front of everybody. When I went to the safe house, I did end up going to a homeless shelter, the Rose, for 2 days with my 2 sons, which was very nerve-wracking. My parents opened up their house to me so I could be in a more comfortable environment other than with all these women and children sharing a room like other people has in a homeless shelter. I went to my parents' house. After going there, I started applying for Burbank housing because that was the only way that I'm going to be able to afford anything by myself with 3 children. At the moment, there was, of course, only waiting lists. And I was lucky enough to go to Papago Court Apartments, and the manager at the time, Damaris, wasn't able to do the waiting list, so she set me up in an appointment to actually get into low-income housing. And actually, I was able to get in 6 months later into the low-income housing, and my world has changed tremendously since then. I have a stable income thanks to being able to not to worry about having a shelter over my head, and my children, I'm able to provide for them what they need instead of having to sit there and struggle day to day because of the affordable housing and what it's done for me. Without Burbank, like I said in the beginning, I don't know where I would be. I'm a single mother of 3 children. Without the affordable housing that I have acquired, I'd be lost. Because Sonoma County is very expensive, especially for the people like myself. I didn't choose to be in the situation I was in, but I had to get out of it. And thanks to Burbank, I actually learned a valuable lesson. Instead of dwelling on my decisions, I feel more confident and happy about my decisions. And I am here to hopefully sum up. Sorry. But yeah, thanks to affordable housing, I am where I am, and I'm very happy. My children are happy, and I am in a very strong place, thanks to Burbank. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ms. Dominguez. Bill Nickel, followed by Dorothy Battenfeld.
My name is Bill Nickel, and I'm here for the second time. I was here last week.
I'm here to speak for the housing for veterans, also the homeless as well. I'm very active, try to be active in everything I do. I was on the Council on Aging some 20-some odd years ago when Shirley Zane was there. I spoke before this Board of Supervisors a couple weeks ago about housing, about how I see these veterans are sleeping in restrooms. I'm very active up there at the VA clinic on Aviation Boulevard, and I get the shuttle bus into the VA hospital, and I see a lot of this homeless veterans around there, where they are locking themselves in. They're removed eventually by security of some kind. With the things I see are just terrible on the housing. I'm just here to appeal to you people to help these people. I try to do what I can. If it wasn't for Burbank Housing, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable where I am. I've been there over 20 years. Thank God for Burbank Housing. It helps me out there and everything I do. I know the VA gets a bad rap, and that's not fair either, because the VA is very good to me. They take care of me. They look after me. I'm a service-connected veteran, and I'm getting up there to the age now that they're even offering me in-house care with new rules going into care. But I'm here to speak mostly for my fellow veterans and also for the homeless. It's just a shame to see those things out there the way they are. And I hope you people can help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nickel. Dorothy Battenfeld, followed by Keith Woods.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dorothy Battenfeld. I live in Santa Rosa, and I also represent Santa Rosa on the Santa Rosa Junior College Board of Trustees. And as you've already heard very eloquently from some of our students and students who are coming to us from Santa Rosa City Schools, the lack of affordable housing is really a significant and urgent issue for Santa Rosa Junior College. And because we're the ones that are educating a lot of the workers in our county, it also means it's urgent for our community. And so I'm really here to ask you to make the housing bond your top priority for placement on the November ballot. As you've heard, the lack of affordable housing is one of the most significant barriers to student success at SRJC. You know, we can do all that we can do to help students achieve academically, but if they're homeless, if they're working 2 and 3 jobs to pay the rent while they're trying to go to school, they're just not going to be able to be successful. So our enrollment is dropping because of that. We have students taking fewer courses. We have students not enrolling, dropping classes. This is affecting our students' ability to transfer to a 4-year school. At this point, it's taking the average student 6 years, which is way too long. It's also really affecting our career programs. One of the young women spoke about wanting to be a nurse. We need nurses. We need first responders in our community, and the JC is training them. They're full-time to do that. And if you can't afford where you're living and you're having to work, you're not going to be able to enroll in a lot of those programs. And so housing is really key to our student success. It also is affecting our staffing. We're one of the biggest employers in the county. We currently employ over 3,400 people at the JC as teachers, as administrators, as professional staff. And like Santa Rosa City Schools and other schools, we're having a really hard time retaining and recruiting staff in our community, and I'm sure you've heard that from other big employers in the county as well. So I would really urge you to support this. And again, especially now as a housing recovery, we had over 900 students. I think it's actually the latest is it's now more than 1,000 who lost homes in the fire. And so this is on top of the ongoing housing issues that students have had. And I do think when people talk to me about the JC, probably like you've heard too, that's what they want to talk about is housing and how students need housing. And so I think the community really is willing to support housing because they want to support our community. Just like you support our community, I think people really do want to do that, and they know that housing is important. And I have lots of experience with bonds, and I would really encourage you not to be real specific, but to get community support behind a unified bond and then work out specifics later. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Battenfeld. Keith Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, just followed by Scott Johnson. Go ahead, Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Keith Woods. I'm CEO of the North Coast Builders Exchange and manager of the Apollo Way RV Park. Temporarily, call me if you need a spot. I've got two things I want to read to you and then an observation to make in my time with you. I'm going to read something from Ken Kreischer. He's our president this year, and he couldn't be here, but he asked me to read this. My name is Ken Kreischer. I'm a local resident and contractor, but I've asked for the statement to be read as the current president of the North Coast Builders Exchange concerning the proposed housing recovery bond. The NCBE Board of Directors, made up of both union and non-union contractors, voted unanimously to oppose any bond brought forth by the city that included the previously floated use of prevailing wage, skilled and trained workforce, and the 30% requirement of union workers. Our opposition is not driven by union versus non-union. In fact, we believe neither group, nobody, should have any prescribed advantage nor guaranteed carve-out for the work built into your bond measure. Ken goes on to say, contractors should be free to hire who they want and make the determination of their skills. After all, it's the contractor who's responsible for the pricing. We're not opposed to housing. We're opposed to a tricked-up bond measure. And come on, give the people a straightforward bond measure with no bells and whistles, no attachments to it that are special deals or gimmicks or political favors. You owe to the voters a straightforward measure. I'm going to read you from a local business, a building contractor who's built a lot of affordable housing. He says, in our extensive experience with building affordable housing, requiring that a project be performed by signatory labor or giving signatory labor a significant advantage results in a minimum additional cost of 10% over the cost of the prevailing wage. That's not the way to spend public money. And is that really what you want to do to voters? We couldn't figure out exactly why would you want to trick up what should be a very straightforward bond measure to let the voters decide on. And then we found out why. In a memo that came from Mr. Buckhorn to the council, the following sentence appeared, and Mr. Buckhorn was fairly selective when he said that the unions are supporting the measure. His email to you said, unfortunately, if our amendments are not accepted, we will be actively opposing any tax measures placed on the ballot. Wow, that's like our organization saying you ought to put in there that every contractor has to belong to the North Coast Builders Exchange. It would be equally wrong. Look, we don't oppose the concept of housing. We're in the building business, but there's something fundamentally wrong with you tricking up a bond measure as what could only be perceived as some sort of political favor or payback. Don't do it.
Scott Johnson, followed by Thomas Ells.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Scott Johnson, EAH Housing. I will keep it very brief and simply say that EAH, along with the wide, robust, strong, experienced network of allied nonprofit community builders that you have present in this room and ready to build in Santa Rosa, that we're all ready. We are all ready, poised, willing to launch forward to help the city of Santa Rosa implement and perform to its highest priority. That highest priority being getting housing production in the ground rapidly and getting people into homes. You have a wide network of nonprofit developers, as I say, ready, willing, and poised to help you in that public-private partnership work. Many of us within that network have experienced within the jurisdictions that have recently adopted bonds, Alameda County, San Mateo County, Santa Clara County. We know what that model is. We know what it takes to rapidly move those resources forward and to get people housed. EAH encourages you to adopt at the highest level feasible the housing recovery bond. And let me just go on record to say that EAH, as it's currently crafted, we don't have a problem with the public benefit statement as it's currently crafted. Thank you.
Thomas Ells, followed by Mara Ventura.
Thank you for considering all three of these measures. It's very important for Santa Rosa. I think the not being Protestant, but the great Protestant mantra was moderation in all things. It was mentioned that this was a mutual effort, endeavor across the community to develop the bond measure as a recovery. And this has really proved to be an existential question for Santa Rosa. The question is, to continue to be a city of the future, we need housing. And that was one of the main priority goals of the city just a few years ago, was to be a city of the future. But to continue to be a city in the present, you need the general funds. So you really need both of these. And the focus of this is the mutual intersection of the priority is to be a city, to be a city. You're not going to be able to be a city if you backfill your general funds and make a tax, whether it's however you're going to make that tax without doing the housing, because we just had all these houses be lost. That is what the effect is that you're trying to backfill. This is the problem that you're seeing with your revenues, is the housing. Not only just the housing the way it is, but the lack of housing is inflationary itself, causing you to have greater costs. This can reduce your future costs by having housing. Your future costs are going to go up radically. Pension fund cost obligations and employment cost obligations because of inflationary housing. You need to solve that problem. It's not solving that by having the tax, by having the backfilling the general fund. So you want to share the pain. I really think that also the issues of permanent supportive housing and affordable housing get multipliers. You're going to multiply the effect of the income that you have from a bond. But I would make the smallest bond possible, not the largest bond, even though that's a good idea. But again, sharing the pain and having the smallest bond possible, because you're going to pay back 2.5 to 3 times the amount of the bond by the time you pay the interest. By having the current income from a sales tax and TOT tax, I would recommend all three of these taxes share the pain. The reason is that you then have the smallest bond with the smallest amount of interest paid back. You get an early kickoff for your affordable housing, and then you carry that through with the taxable TOT and the $0.25. You're going to backfill your general funds, but you need to solve the structural problem. You need to solve that. Even if you backfill with the $0.25, you're still going to have, well, you could, if you don't do the housing, you're going to have increased inflationary pressure from all your employment and your so I would recommend all three. And the last thing I would say is that cost is not price. There's profit in there, both for the construction and the hotel. So during the week, they could reduce their rates. Thank you.
Thank you. Mara Ventura, is she still here? Oh, there you go. Hi, Mara. And she'll be followed by Gail Simons.
Hi, thanks, council members. Mara Ventura, Director of North Bay Jobs with Justice. I quickly wanted to talk about our support at North Bay Jobs with Justice for the redlined amended version of the bond with the labor provisions in there that were on slide 18. I want to bring up 2 points. One, I brought up when I was here last year, and I was digging in my phone right now trying to find it, but last time I was here, I talked about a study from the U.S. Department of Justice they did on the recovery of Hurricane Katrina. And we had done extensive research on that even actually before our fires, but then during the firestorm as well, to try to understand what went well and what didn't go well in other places. And so we also did that with Hurricane Sandy. But one of the biggest things that we found that the U.S. Department of Justice had put out in a report and done some extensive interviews was about the contractor fraud, and how one thing that they had wished they had done better was be more thoughtful about wages and labor provisions, and being thoughtful to the contractors and the folks coming in and who they're bringing in and how they're building. And so we fundamentally believe that these labor provisions are one of the most important things that we could put in any type of recovery or rebuild efforts that we have. And also just wanted to quickly point out some rhetoric that I have heard, not just here, but in our community in general, around rebuilding and rebuilding with higher costs, that using using union labor, which actually I think 30% is still very low, but in general costs more. And, it costs more for the people who are rebuilding. And so what we end up doing is creating this binary of people who lost their homes and are rebuilding and the workers that we're paying. But some of those communities are the same people. Just in the experience that North Bay Labor Council and us have been out and talked to folks over the last 8 or 9 months, we could give you 15 or 20 people just off the top of our heads who are construction workers who are going to be rebuilding these homes and who lost their own homes. And so being able to make sure that we have prevailing wage and that we're thinking about language that protects them and prioritizes them means that we're also thinking about people who lost their homes. They're the same community in many ways. So I just want to address that. And then finally, I just wanted to also throw quick support behind the TOT tax. I'm listening to some of the testimony today, and excited to hear more about what some of the concerns around home sharing are. But I think just off the top of the Sonoma County Annual Tourism Report that your Economic Development Board put out this past year, one thing that they mentioned just in terms of hotels alone are that hotels have risen nearly 50% since bottoming in 2010, their occupancy rates. They have raised their occupancy rates now 9 years in a row, and reaching $300 million in profits in 2016. So I think it's absolutely time for a raise in TOT tax to be competitive with places like Napa.
Thank you, Ms. Ventura.
Thank you.
Gail Simons, followed by Brian Ling.
Hi, thank you for introducing me, and thank you for your patience tonight, Council. I am a homeowner. I have been in Santa Rosa 44 years, and I am a retired nurse. So I am privileged to be a homeowner and not to have lost my house this year. I have an idea that I think might help us. I'm going to vote for all three. I know you're going to put the right details in all three, and I'm going to vote for all three. We, of course, need housing. I have an idea that I think might help us sell this, because we're going to have to sell it, obviously, even though many of us this year will be more empathetic than in other years, I think. I believe that sanctioned tent encampments, that tiny house villages, are actually permanent supportive housing for many people. They are much cheaper than the affordable housing alternatives that we are all talking about right now. And believe it or not, there are many people that would find that quite acceptable as a form of housing. I wish Scott Wagner had been able to speak. Yesterday I saw a slide presentation that he gave of a tour of Oregon and Washington, tiny house villages and tent villages, 8, 12, 20 little homes on a nice graveled area that was land given either by churches or by the public, outhouse, or some had flush toilet buildings, portable showers, and a garbage bin. They were clean, they were safe, they governed themselves. I think we need to realize that we need to have many, many, many steps in housing. We seem to do a great run and then a leap into $350,000 homes. So if we had a 100-pound Gravenstein apple, how would we eat it? one bite at a time. So I think I can see a glossy trifold going out into the community showing these little pastel houses behind a fence. They look so neat and tidy. We could be a model. We could bring tourism here if we didn't have people sleeping in business doorways. So I see a lot of ups for trying to sell that to the public and provide it for people that need homes. I also think that I've heard some people talking about resilience in our community. There aren't many people that are more resilient than homeless people, and we're not giving them the opportunity to do that. People all over the world live in groups. Cities, towns, villages, tribes, everybody lives in groups. I just drove through Coffey Park. My heart was aching for the people in Greece. I could see in Coffey Park the houses rising. They were rising in a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simons. Brian Ling, followed by Efren Carrillo.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Brian Ling, Sonoma County Alliance. I've got a number of comments here, try to put it all together. Understand that on the overall, it's based on my assumption that some kind of a housing bond is going to move forward tonight. First of all, no on the sales tax. I'll just leave it at that. No on the sales tax, and we feel the TOT is very aggressive. Frankly, recommend pushing that back to another election, another day. We've all said that housing is our #1 priority. Every jurisdiction in this county has said #1 priority, but we need to show it's the #1 priority and put that only on the ballot. The infrastructure question, no, save that for another day. The ballot coming up is going to be very noisy, and what I mean by that is the state has the repeal of SB 1, which is going to be a very controversial tax measure, the repeal of the Costa-Hawkins rent control, possibly likely our own rent control locally, the housing bond at the state level, the housing bond at our level. Every one of these is going to take education to get passed. The polling data, no matter who you ask, you get different opinions. That alone tells you that 67% is going to be brutal to get to. So we've got to have as least amount of noise possible. Prevailing wage is a noise. We've heard it tonight. We've got to keep prevailing wage only to where it's contingent on getting matching funds to build the most quality and quantity houses we could get. If we're not bold now, when are we going to be? We've all said that. Are we in a crisis? Yes, it's going to take bold to get out of it. Santa Rosa has an opportunity to take leadership. The rest of this county is watching. Mayor Mansell was here earlier. Their own boards running, decided last night to wait another day. The counties decided to wait another day. They want to see Santa Rosa get this passed. And quite frankly, for me personally, I want to see the business groups get to yes. I want to help the business groups get to yes, but I can't do it with a high tax. Business is going to have to pay tax. They're going to have to buck up and do it, but labor is going to have to back off their demands and take what they can get. This whole community is going to have to do this to get this passed. 2/3 is brutally tough to get to. Two points that haven't been mentioned tonight is our jobs. Don't forget Keysight, one of our major employers, Medtronic, one of our major employers. They have business locations throughout the United States and in some cases internationally. They can move their people. You've heard from both of those entities. You've heard from 3 hospitals. They can't get nurses, doctors, technicians, engineers, anybody. We need to get this done. So one last thing, who's not here? The no growth. I spent over 200 hours in these public forums hearing from the no growth. They're not here. They know it's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Efren Carrillo.
Mr. Mayor, esteemed council members, one of the few things I learned when I was in public service was when you make all priorities priorities, you have no priorities. And I would encourage the council to build upon what you've already done as far as responding to the housing crises, as far as responding to homeless issues, as far as responding to rebuild and recovery, and continue to move the momentum for housing only. I do believe that it's hard and difficult to say no to a TOT increase. I think that the voters will support you in that. It is a modest decrease from 5% to 3%. I do believe that the voters of Santa Rosa will support that. However, if you are invited to put TOT, sales tax, and a housing bond, I fear that the voters may see that as a full package and simply say no. I say that as a resident of Santa Rosa, as a taxpayer, as a homeowner, and as someone who's willing to pay an increase, a parcel tax or assessed tax to support the working class and those that make our community whole. I would also encourage that whatever you can do to make the ask of the community as clear as possible will help facilitate get this across the finish line. I would say that not include infrastructure as part of the housing bond. I think we understand that we have issues with bridges and roads and potholes. That's evident across the county. But one of the things that we learned at the county as well, when the county went forward with their infrastructure measure, is that in an attempt to make the camp bigger and including public safety in that, it actually confused the voters and was part of its defeat. I think housing only is the way to go and would encourage the council to once again continue to do what you've already been doing, and that's incentivizing, that's looking at the entitlement process, that's looking at streamlining, that's looking at addressing the fees that it costs to get good development done, and allow the community, the affordable housing and the development community, the business community, to help this measure pass. It will be good for housing. It is good for the economy. And in fact, if you think about it, this is an infrastructure bond because housing is community infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Carrillo. That's all the cards I have. Before we bring this back to the council.
Can I speak, sir?
Sure, introduce yourself, please,
Frank
sir.
Baumgartner. I live at 1537 Shell Court. Thank you, sir. I did turn in a card. I don't know what happened to it. But I've lived there since 2009, and I love Santa Rosa. I love living there. But I'm going to tell you a story about how San Jose got its light rail. And that is, the reason they got it was that they went low. They started off with a quarter-cent. They only asked the voters for a small amount, and they got it. The point is they got it, and they can build on that. If you throw a big bond issue at the public right now, it's going down. I can guarantee you. It'll go down. And do you want that all over your face when you wake up on November 7th? Do you want that? I don't think so. You've heard all these good people, and we're pleading to pass a bond. And this gentleman right here had it right. Go for the smallest one. Go for the 81 million, and you'll get it. And I guarantee you, you'll get it. But if you go for too much, I mean, I don't trust polls. You got to realize what the fool we got in the White House now is because of polls kept saying, oh, she's got it won. And we all believed it. Well, guess what? Anyway, that's all I have to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Baumgartner.
You're welcome.
Yes, please introduce yourself. Use the microphone.
My name is Kathleen Winston. I am 68 years old. I have Social Security, but it's very low. I can't afford to rent anything. I am on the waiting list for Burbank housing, but it's years long. I'm living in my car. I need a safe place to park. I'm parking on Apollo Way. They said they're going to run us out of there. Before I found that place, I was parking in shopping center parking lots, and every night the police would come and tell me I had to move. I don't have a lot of money for gas, so I can't drive around a lot. I like staying on Apollo Way because I can go in there and the computer, work. It's the job link place, and I put in job applications every day. And I've had several interviews, but I'm getting denied. When I took care of my mom for 10 years, she had Alzheimer's, and when she died, I didn't know that I was going to have such a hard time getting a job again. I never had trouble getting a job before, even though I always worked minimum wage. I was a nursing assistant for 14 years, but I can't do that now. So I need a safe place to park right now. That's what I'm asking for. And I hope that affordable housing gets built. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Winston. Okay, that is all the cards I have. There was a lot of checking in with staff during the first part of that. Is there anything that you need to relay to the council at this point? Okay. All right. I'm going to use my prerogative and lead this off. And first, let the rest of the council know that the ad hoc subcommittee on housing and infrastructure did make a recommendation on this and on the housing recovery bond, and I do think that recovery is an important word if we can have that in here somewhere. The recommendation of the ad hoc is to put this on the ballot at $29. I know that polling is all over the map on this stuff, and frankly, I agree with the speaker who said that she didn't have a lot of faith in polls right now. But there's one thing that isn't ambiguous. There's no ambiguity about what people in Santa Rosa feel like is the most pressing issue, and that is housing. It's our biggest problem. It's our biggest need. And we need to address it. We've set goals for the amount of housing we want to build in the next 5 or 6 or 7 years. That includes affordable housing, and I think the number is between 2,400 and 2,500 units. We're not going to be able to do that without subsidizing it somehow. We don't have to subsidize all of it, but we have to subsidize some of it. And we've done that in the past. We've created hundreds, maybe thousands of units of affordable housing in Santa Rosa over the years with redevelopment money that used to be $8 million a year that doesn't exist anymore. We did it more recently when we had some surplus money by putting out the notice of funding availability, and that was just a couple years ago. But that surplus is gone up in smoke, if I may use that metaphor. So we're asking the community here to respond to our housing crisis. And $29 per $100,000 in valuation raises your tax on your property by $124 a year. That's about 1,200 units in Santa Rosa created by it raises 124 million, creates about 1,200 units, about half of what we need. So we're going to need more than this, but this is a start. We're not putting the full burden of this on the community. We're only asking for about half the units right now. We're not putting that full burden on the community. We're asking for help. So I wanted to go to the tax valuation, and thank you for getting that information, Mr. Gwine. The average Santa Rosa home is valued for taxable purposes at $379,000. That's $110 a year per home, the average home. Less than $10 a month, 30 cents a day, and that goes toward the city's biggest need. I think that the good residents of this city are willing to pay 30 cents a day to create affordable housing. So the elephant in this room tonight seems to be the disagreement between business and developers and labor over how this money will be spent. And this goes on despite months of good faith effort. I really want to appreciate Councilman Tibbetts, who's not here tonight except for the message in the bottle. But he spent a lot of time talking to stakeholders, trying to get agreement on these things. That effort has continued even while he's at sea, but we haven't been able to get there. So the good news is that we don't have to get there tonight. We need to adopt a resolution and an ordinance to put this on the ballot. We don't have to have a public benefits section right now, and I would recommend that we don't try and solve that problem right now. We have two more weeks till our next meeting. We can make decisions then about whatever statement of what was the term of art, Mr. Gwine? The statement of principles or statement of what does the Housing Authority use?
Program guidelines.
Program guidelines. There's more time for these folks to get together, and I encourage them to do that, because if we're going to do this, we need to do this together. This is something that is going to benefit the people of this city. You heard stories tonight about how affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing, can turn lives around. I think we want to do that. So let's put this on the ballot and keep moving tonight. Just a couple minutes more on, first of all, the sales tax. The ad hoc committee did not recommend a sales tax. There was not a majority for that. I respectfully disagree with that. I think that we should put a sales tax on the ballot. When we took this vote at the ad hoc committee, it was before we met last week with city staff to talk about ways to cut a $15 million deficit that we're facing in this fiscal year, and how to deal with that in the years going forward. An increase in the sales tax isn't going to fix that, but it can help. This is a structural problem that existed before the fire, but the fire exacerbated it. We have to deal with it one way or another right now. In the next couple of months, we're going to be talking at the council level, probably in September, about how to cut into that $15 million deficit. The community will have a good idea of what that means, what it looks like to cut $7, $8, $9 million out of our budget in the coming year. They will understand how that affects the services that they need and want. As I said, a temporary sales tax won't save us from all of those cuts, but it'll help us get there. And I think what we need to do is allow the voters to decide whether they want to provide the help that a sales tax can provide to help us get there. So I'd like to just put the sales tax into the voters' hands. I don't like sales taxes. They're regressive. We already have too many of them. But the way that the state of California tax system is set up, it's one of the few ways that we can do this. So that's where I am on the sales tax. And honestly, I feel like going to the TOT right now, if we can get to an agreement on sales tax and the housing bond, I think the TOT can wait. Any other questions or comments? Actually, let me ask Mr. Schwedhelm, as the other representative of the ad hoc committee, if he wants to weigh in here.
On all of them?
Whatever you're ready for him.
So it's interesting, and I'll just go in the same order. I wasn't sure if we're going to talk about all three at the time or do them individually, so I'll just go in the same order that the mayor did. I'd like to echo many of those comments, and for me, what a long, strange trip it's been. So when we first started talking about this, our goal, and my goal solely was to get every community group, subject matter expert, they could either live with what we're proposing or they could fully support it. And it wasn't until just recently, as the mayor said the last week, that it doesn't look like we're going to achieve that. And so that was the big challenge for me, is that, I was kind of staying neutral, because as long as we get everyone going, because we have to pass this bond. And so I am supportive of your language. Let's not get in the expenditure plan into this language here. I don't think it should be included, because where I'm struggling is that doing a special interest carve out, it just does not seem fair. And again, I'd rather let the people have that vote. And we've heard it described as ornaments hanging on this bond measure. No, let's just give it to the people. And looking at what the other counties have done and talking to developers, the fewer contingencies, or you have to do this, the bigger challenges they are. Recently heard that Alameda County, who passed their bond measure about a year and a half ago, they're still negotiating some of those different things. So that's what with the housing bond. But ultimately, I think this body has got to pass something, because we have to take action here. We need the housing. And where we end up with that, I agree with the mayor that discussion may be on August 7th or even some point after that. But we need to give the voters the opportunity to help us with the housing. Regarding the sales tax, comments that I made early is I agree with some of the speakers. We need a priority. But after the information that we received on Thursday, and I'm not sure how many members of the audience were there, but there are some significant implications that this city is going to encounter due to lack of funding in our general fund. I was surprised / disappointed to see the figures actually got millions of dollars worse from our budget hearings in June just last week. That's significant. And unfortunately, that meeting was not as well as attended as today is. But the ramifications that if we don't go forward with the sales tax, let the people decide, we're going to need that funding, because there are going to be some significant cuts, because we cannot fix the structural changes in this organization in the time frame that the city manager has to do something, because the money is just not there. So I am very reluctantly supportive of the sales tax, but that's not the case with the TOT, because for me that 9%, if you look at 1994, we established the TOT. Well, what we paid for rooms in 1994 are not what we pay for rooms now. So that's been escalating. I don't think we need to change that number. And again, my fear is that the voters are going to say no to all. But again, for those reasons, housing is the #1 priority, but we're going to need to have that sales tax, or the ramifications for this community, I think, are going to be very significant and severe.
Thank you, Mr. Sweathelm. Ms. Combs, you have this. I'm going to go this way. Comments, questions?
Thank you, Mayor, and I really appreciate the comments of both the Mayor and Councilmember Schwedhelm. I'm pleased that we are delaying the conversation about the public benefit goals. I've been very, very clear about my feelings toward PLAs, whether they be PLA light or PLA full. So being able to delay that conversation, I very much appreciate. I find that because I find it exclusive, and I think this is the time to be inclusive more than ever, and to create a level playing field for all people that are looking to help build housing in Santa Rosa. The conversation we had last week was very sobering, and so it is clear to me that not only is housing desperately important in our community, not only currently but in the future, but we also have a structural deficit that needs to be addressed. And without that, we'll be building homes in a community that is declining. And I think that people hopefully they will begin to understand the necessity of having funds coming into the city in addition to those funds that we can levy or that we can parlay into a great number of housing units, but we need to have the help of the community to understand the desperate financial times that we find ourselves in. And so although it is hard to be supportive of a sales tax, I'm real happy about it, but I am pleased by the figure that would come out of it. That $9 million could go a long way to helping our community get through some difficult financial times. I'll be curious to see what the rest of the council thinks about the TOT. It is the smallest amount that we would be looking at. It would be nice not to have all three on the ballot. I think it is going to be a challenging ballot. So my first inclination was to let the voters decide, but that the fear of them being overwhelmed is a concern of mine. And so I would be willing to support the removal of the TOT from the conversation as we move forward, but I'll be curious to see what the rest of the council says.
Are you okay?
Give me one more round.
Okay. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think as we sat there last week and preparing for this meeting today, I think one thing became really apparent to all of the council members, and that regardless of what we decided to move forward with this Tuesday, tonight, we're looking at a couple of really painful years when it comes to our city finances and our budget. And while we have been talking a lot about the structural deficit that the city finds itself in, and we've been talking for 2 years, at least as long as I've been here, on ways that we can work towards righting the ship and the plan that we had in place to try to right that ship and create an organization that is a 21st century model, the fire made it so that we ran out of a runway. We have no time to make the changes that we were expected to make or that we were going to try to make. So as much as I dislike the sales tax increase as well, what I'm chiefly concerned about is not having matching funds for a lot of the fire recovery projects that we have moving forward, for not having a reserve in the event that there was another tragedy that happened in Santa Rosa. It's worth reminding the public that we had over 19% reserves before the fire hit, that the city was saving funds in a way that was better than most cities in California, and was looking at ways to address systemic issues that we have, whether it was pension obligations, deferred maintenance, and the fire wiped that out. And it might take us a number of years to get back to that point to be able to continue to address those. But as for right now, what we really need is to make sure that this city stays solvent and that we don't allow progress on our priorities such as housing and homelessness to be completely derailed by the fire. So reluctantly, I will support adding the sales tax onto the ballot. For the same reason, I am also supportive of the TOT. When it comes to the housing bond, there is no greater long-term, and when I say long-term, I mean 10, 15, 20-year priority for the city than allowing particularly our workforce, our young families, and people who are living on a fixed income to remain in Santa Rosa. I made a comment earlier about Santa Rosa should be for everyone, in particular Santa Rosans, and I know that we've all really struggled hearing the stories of folks who grew up here who cannot remain here. I feel that struggle every day as a renter living in this community as well, and somebody who's dealing with astronomical student loan debt, high rent, and just a general high cost of living. It is not sustainable and it is not affordable to live in Santa Rosa. The polling on the housing bond is not great. Generally, numbers don't go up from what you see. But even knowing that it's an uphill climb, to me, we have to try to do something to address our housing issues, and we have to continue to have a conversation in the public about how we all are going to work together to do this, because this community has created haves and have-nots in the way that our rental prices have gone up and people are being priced out. It's going to need to be a shared effort to fix that, and I'm using the phrase right the ship again because that's where we need to get. To the point that was made, we don't see community groups that are here saying don't build. I think everybody understands that this is a crisis for Santa Rosa and in particular the North Bay, and we all need to work together on this. I was supportive of the language to make sure that we had the community benefits in there. I understand if the mayor and others would like to have that conversation continue to go outside of that. I want to make sure that that happens, that we continue to have that conversation. I know it was like pulling teeth to make sure that we got the language back here for discussion tonight. I just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. I will be supportive of the housing bond moving forward, and I believe the recommendation from committee of the $29 per 100,000 is the appropriate amount.
Thank you. Mr. Oliveros.
I'm ready to go now. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I, for one, can personally tell you that I don't have a lot of faith in polls either, so. But I do know that we are in a major crisis right now. Our whole community is, and I really appreciate Jackie Ortiz coming to share her story, because I know there's many, many, many more stories like hers out there. So I do support the housing bond. I wish we could consider 35, but again, we don't know what's going to happen, so I guess we can settle for the $25. 29, I'm sorry. The sales tax, again, we had a sobering conversation last week, and I think that is a must. TOT would be nice, but again, it's a lot for voters to consider. Even if we consider just a little bit on the TOT, but perhaps this is not the time for that. I think it is a matter of looking at our priorities, and housing is a priority, but also keeping our city finances sound is also a major priority for us as well that we cannot ignore. So I will be supporting that, but I do want to continue that conversation and get more information related to some of the labor issues, and if that comes back, that's fine. I'd be happy to have that discussion.
Thank you. And Ms. Combs, if you'll permit me just one more minute, I want to make it clear that I do expect the conversation to continue about the public benefits. I do consider items like prevailing wage and local hire to be public benefits, and I strongly believe that public money should benefit the public. I don't want anybody to hear me tonight saying that I'll accept whatever comes back. I want to see some agreement here, and that's what I'm hoping we can find. Please.
Thank you. We all agree there's a housing crisis. We all sit here wanting housing for all. That's obvious as a region. The polls have consistently shown people our residents are interested in housing, worried about housing. There's a little difference between how worried they are and how much they'll pay. But I think we can help overcome some of those barriers as we move this forward, as united as we are about it. We need housing for our veterans, our teachers, our nurses, our restaurant workers, our farmers, our young adults. I want my kids to be able to live here. They don't right now. Middle-class families. Easily 40% of our new housing needs to be affordable. And the market is not going to take care of those below market rate units. 40% of our new housing. So we need a housing bond. And clearly we as a council are united about having a housing bond. And we've said previously for a number of years, this is our priority. So I think we are putting our priority out there first. I don't entirely agree with my colleagues with regard to what is a compromise on certain kinds of language and where it should be. I think if you're talking about 100% of your resources going to build housing, and we really are recognizing this also as a job stimulus package, as a package that will help our whole community in its recovery. A compromise is usually 50-50, and this one is at 30-70. So I think asking 30% for local hire, for good job training, and for skilled and trained union workers is a low number. I would hate to see the building community sort of cut off its nose by fighting money that will help builders build by resisting a number as small as 30%. Particularly when with most matching funds it would be required anyway. If we are able to come to an agreement about the language in the next week, I will be surprised, but pleasantly surprised. It concerns me not to have it directly in the measure. I can count, and I will make the motion without the language in the measure, understanding that it will come back more clearly in the materials that the Housing Authority may work with. But it is with great resistance that I would make the motion in the way I'm about to. It surprises me to hear my colleagues talk about the TOT and the sales tax, only because the conversations that I've had in the community have been do one, don't do all three. And I've also heard, though not here tonight, I have had folks mention to me strong resistance to if we brought all three, they would fight all three, even though they would support the housing bond if we don't bring all three. I have had difficulty understanding that position, but I have heard it. So I'm surprised at my colleagues' interest in all three. I would have thought the TOT made some sense only because it seems to me easy to pass a TOT. Folks are generally more willing to tax someone else visiting them than they are to tax themselves. So I'm going to move forward, having said that. First, with the sales tax, my understanding, I'm only looking at the red line versions, and I understand I read the resolution first.
Yes. Among the things that we were discussing here were word counts.
Yes.
And it did come to my attention on the sales tax measure in adding the language that was required by law. I think I went a little overboard, and I have a couple of extra words. So I've have some deletions in the ordinance language, and I can simply read that now. It's probably the easiest. It's going to delete 4 words. I don't know whether it's easier for me to just read it as it's going to read. So it will be the City of Santa Rosa Vital City Services Measure to provide temporary funding to recover from the October 2017 fires and preserve city services, including maintaining 911 emergency response times and neighborhood police patrols, repairing potholes, streets, and sidewalks, rebuilding firefighting infrastructure.
You canceled the and there?
I deleted the and.
Okay.
Rebuilding firefighting infrastructure and fire prevention. Shall the City of Santa Rosa enact a 1/4 cent sales tax for 6 years only, generating approximately $9 million annually for unrestricted general fund purposes, subject to annual audits, with all revenue staying in Santa Rosa? I think that I have the number correct with that. The other item that I was going to mention is that on all of these measures will require 5 affirmative votes to pass for different reasons for each measure, but all of them do have that requirement. And I know we're going to talk about sales tax first, but I'll also mention among the other items that we were discussing was we had heard some interest in adding the word recovery into the housing bond, and we do have language for that when you get to that.
Let's do that one when I get there.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Let's do them one at a time because it can get confusing.
Yes.
So the motion that I'm moving is resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa ordering submission of a ballot measure to approve an ordinance of the City of Santa Rosa adding Chapter 3-29 to Title 3 of the City of Santa Rosa Code to impose a temporary 1/4 cent general transactions and use tax to be administered by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, approving ballot language permitting the filing of rebuttal arguments, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis, and providing direction regarding ballot arguments in support of the measure as amended, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
A question, Mr. Rogers.
Quick question that I keep meaning to ask. The estimate that we were given was that it would cost about $60,000 per measure to put it on.
It's a
City Clerk, I believe that's a question for you.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
So I believe the estimate that we were given originally was that it would cost about $60,000 per measure to place on the ballot, and that we had allocated enough in the budget for 2.
So it's $80,000 for each ballot measure, and currently we have, what we did was we put in up to, I believe, Alan, I think we talked about whether or not if we needed to add on more funds, we would bring that back, because the county doesn't actually, it seems like their invoices isn't full amount, so it doesn't make sense for us to ask for the money now beforehand, up to the $500,000, which is the amount that they quoted me for up to 2 ballot measures. But that's only, I guess there's a lot of variations involved, but it is $80,000 per ballot measure, and right now we currently have enough funds to cover for that.
Great, thank you.
So, yeah, but I mean, that's, the short answer is we have enough funds to cover up to 2 ballot measures with the $500,000 that we've appropriated funds.
Okay.
And your votes. That has 6 ayes.
I'll read the ordinance that goes with that. Ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa adding Chapter 3-29 to Title 3 of the Santa Rosa City Code to impose a temporary 1/4 cent general transactions and use tax to be administered by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes. And that has 6 ayes.
I'll take the TOT.
And by that action, you have introduced that ordinance, and it will be subsequently voted on by the voters for final action.
Do we see it again August 7th?
There's no second reading?
There's no need for a second reading.
Thank you.
It's optional. Many jurisdictions do, but it is not required.
Okay. TOT. I'll read it as it is. Resolution of the Council.
Excuse me, Ms. Combs, is this the red line also?
This is also the red line of the TOT.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to say as amended after everything. Resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa ordering submission of a ballot measure to approve an ordinance of the City of Santa Rosa amending Section 3-28.020 of the Santa Rosa City Code to increase the city's transient occupancy tax, approving ballot language permitting the filing of rebuttal arguments, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis, and providing direction regarding ballot arguments in support of the measure as amended. And waive further reading of the text.
We have a motion and a second. Your votes, please. And that has 3 ayes and, oh, I'm sorry. Can we revote that? Sorry?
Can you tell me who the second?
It was
Chris
Mr.
Rogers. Thank you.
And I meant to mention when you were speaking earlier, Ms. Combs, that I thought that you may have misheard some members of the council about their desire to put the TOT on the ballot or not.
I may have.
I actually meant to vote no on that, and I'm not sure.
Can you reset the votes? Because I'm trying to sort this out myself. And I had misunderstood, as I spoke, I had understood that there was strong feeling in favor of putting the TOT on. So I appear to have misunderstood.
I didn't hear universal strong feeling about that.
Can you reset?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Because you're right, I misheard, because I was surprised to hear 3 say.
Yeah. Okay, so the motion was to, let's just do it over again if you don't mind.
Resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa ordering submission of a ballot measure to approve an ordinance of the City of Santa Rosa amending Section 3-28.020 of the Santa Rosa City Code to increase the city's transient occupancy tax, approving ballot language permitting the filing of rebuttal arguments, directing the city attorney to provide an impartial analysis, and providing direction regarding ballot arguments in support of the measure. As amended, waive further reading of the text.
And is there a second for that?
Second.
Motion and a second. Your votes? And that fails 4 noes and 2 ayes. The ayes are Ms. Combs and Vice Mayor Rogers.
Okay, now the trickier one here. I want to confirm a couple of things before I make the motion.
I'm sorry, I'm back to being confused. And I apologize, everybody. It's been a long day.
I'm reading the red line version.
Did we do the resolution and the ordinance?
It failed, so I didn't read the ordinance.
We don't need the ordinance.
Okay.
Okay.
Scared me for a minute there. Okay, I'm doing the red line version of the resolution of the housing. We are moving option A and option B at one time to be conditional upon the state law as of August 10th. Is that correct? Can we move them both, or do I need to read them separately?
I think you need to read them separately.
Okay.
And we do have 2 issues on the resolutions as well.
So
if you want to read
I have a couple
first.
of questions that I'd like to go through before then you can make sure I've done it or not.
Very good.
Okay. The first one is, my understanding is there's an oversight committee. Do we need to specify the oversight committee is the housing authority at this time or not?
You can either specify that is the housing authority at this time and substitute that, or you can simply delete the phrase with citizen oversight, or actually you could just delete the citizen with oversight and audits, and then determine later that your oversight is going to be in the housing authority. In the ballot language and in one of the whereases. So,
okay. I'm going to make the motion that we just say with oversight, and that the decision about whether it's citizen oversight, housing authority oversight, other kinds of oversight be determined, so that we have options for oversight. Does that, okay. May I make that?
Actually, I'm sorry, we're getting some conflicting. Yeah, let us take 5 minutes. Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask the next question while they're sorting themselves out?
I think I need to be in that conversation.
You don't need to be on this one, I don't think. Though the question I'm asking is the $29 question.
Okay. Let's just take a 5-minute break.
Let's just wait. Okay.
Okay. Take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
We'll bring the meeting back to order. Ms. Gallagher, do you want to remind us where we are?
We are looking at, the council is ready to consider resolution option A for the housing bond. And there were a couple of corrections to make, and the reason we took the break was because of some question about removing the citizen oversight, indeed that was a concern from the pollster that that the presence of citizen oversight appeared to be important in polling. It is not a legal requirement. So your options would be leave it in as citizen oversight and in fact appoint a citizen oversight committee down the line. Second option would be to delete the citizen part and just say and provide oversight with the decision of how that gets constituted, again, put off to another day. Or you could delete the with citizen oversight entirely, which I think would probably trigger more concern from the pollster. So those would be the 3 different options that I would offer.
It is my intention as the person making the motion to simply use the word oversight and to allow us in the future to make a determination as to citizen housing authority or other group.
Very good.
If I don't have any issues with that among my council members. I am always open to friendly amendments.
I think the housing authority is comprised of citizens.
Housing authority has citizens on it.
Yes, it does.
So does the council.
And then when you are ready and would like me to, I'll have a number of corrections and can also address the recovery, adding that in as well.
Good. Let's do the $29. It is my intention as I move this forward to suggest the $29, and I just want to make sure that I have comfort by my colleagues if I move that. My next mark on my list here is the adding recovery language, which I think you said you might be ready to do. I would be also comfortable directing staff to bring the ballot language back August 7th for re-review of the ballot language, and to also at that time bring the labor-related language back for reconsideration August 7th, so that there's an opportunity for the negotiations to move forward. Okay. There was a question about infrastructure.
Can I just ask staff if that leaves enough time? Does this need to be, when does this need to be in writing if we do it the way that's suggested?
The resolution and ordinance need to be adopted before August 10th. So August 7th meeting, both the resolution and the ordinance could be adopted at that time.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Mr. Gwine, could you say again what the Housing Authority calls this document, guiding?
Program guidelines.
Program guidelines. If we are able to come up with a list of program guidelines that's acceptable to a wide swath of the community, would that be included in the ordinance and resolution, or would it be separate?
It would be a separate resolution, but it could be also brought, if we came to that consensus by the 7th, it could be brought at that time. Again, our posting requirements mean that we have to have some idea of where we're going on that earlier, and we'll have to be able to have a document prepared by the Friday before for post, or Thursday before for posting. But yes, that could be, we would recommend that you adopt that as a separate resolution, but it could be brought at the same time.
Thank you.
So following up on the mayor's question. The items that are on the slides, I think it was 17, 18, and 19.
Yes.
Those were the items that showed the program guidelines. Is that correct?
That would be, I'll let Director
Would there
Gwine.
be additional?
If I'm tracking the conversation correctly, there's existing program guidelines by which the Housing Authority operates, and it would be a question of adding additional guidelines based on your direction into that document.
Are any of the items on those slides and the labor piece not already in the Housing Authority guidelines?
This is basically already in the guidelines. This is not.
Okay.
And did you say 17, 18, and 19?
I wasn't sure if it was, no, 19 isn't one. It was, I thought there were 3 slides.
That is, the 19 is where it's the division of percentage that would go to 80%.
Is that guidelines or is that in the ordinance?
That would be, let me step back a moment to clarify. The program guidelines for the housing bond do not need to be identical to the guidelines that are currently adopted and enacted by the Housing Authority. Yes. So you could take the Housing Authority guidelines and add to it. You could modify those, or you could not deal with those at all and have a separate set of guidelines that are solely for the housing bond monies.
So my question then would be, I obviously have an interest in having the labor language added to the guidelines. I want to confirm that the other language needed here, shown here, is also added to the guidelines.
Yes.
And if on August 7th we made the decision to add additional language or pull language, would there need to be a second hearing?
No, the guidelines will be adopted by resolution. So you don't need to have a second read. The difference will be what those elements, the answer I should have said was, well, it depends. Because it depends on what those additions are, and if they are within the scope of what we've noticed on the agenda, then things could be added. If they are something that has not been, is not within the reasonable realm of the agendized item, then we would have to come back at a later date.
Okay, so if we were to choose to withdraw something from the list that the Housing Authority currently uses, it would have been agendized because the whole list would be agendized.
Right.
So it's about additions.
Right.
Okay, so would these 3 slides be additions to those guidelines?
I haven't reviewed the guidelines recently, so I can't tell you.
Can we make sure that it's noticed in such a way that these 3 slides would be able to be discussed?
Yes, we'll notice it so that these 3 slides and everything that is currently contained in the Housing Authority guidelines, those will all be part of the packet so that all of that will be, you would be able to consider.
I have one more question, and that is, if for some reason we need to legally have another meeting after the 7th, can we have a meeting the 8th, 9th, or 10th to take care of the issues that might come up on the 7th? And that's a very broad question.
That's a very broad question, and that also depends. The council can always have a special meeting, and the special meeting only requires 24-hour notice. So there is time there, and again, it's a resolution, so we're not talking about it's a resolution and an urgency. Well, the program guidelines are simply a resolution.
A resolution. They wouldn't be part of the ordinance.
Right. So all of the elements of the housing bond can be adopted in one meeting and not require a second read.
And how enforceable are guidelines that we resolve? we do by resolution?
Guidelines that are adopted by the council are the city policy and are enforceable.
Okay. And then I'm moving on. Then there was the question with regard to infrastructure. I heard some discussion about wanting to include infrastructure and some discussion saying not to include infrastructure. I am going to choose to not include infrastructure here unless I receive a very friendly amendment. So just letting you know what I'm putting in the pack. Is there anything I've left off the list? There was some language changes to the ballot statement that was also discussed.
Yes.
And that's coming back August 7th for clarification. That includes some simplification and the use of the word recovery.
Right. And what we'll do is, my strong recommendation would be that you the ballot language is embedded in the resolution. So what I'm understanding is we will come back on the 7th with the amended resolution and the ordinance.
Okay.
Back.
I would like to pass the resolution tonight with language coming back on the 7th. Is that at all possible for us? How can we get to yes on that?
The inclusion of ballot language is a central piece of the resolution for it to be effective in moving the housing bond forward.
Excuse me. I believe you. I'm just looking for where it is in the two resolutions.
Sure. In option A, it's on page 3, bottom of page 3.
Okay. Given what you have just said and a strong motivation to move this forward tonight so that we can have some other conversations that may be difficult on the 7th, do you have language that you would suggest tonight on this section?
Yes. And would you like me to read that?
Yep.
Yes, please. And I'm on page 3.
On page 3 of option A.
Yes.
And I will note that you have also separately suggested that we delete the phrase that offers mental health substance abuse services.
Yes.
To clarify that the bonds are going to be used for the actual housing and not services. Supportive housing and not services.
We could remove the words for the homeless if we needed space.
We do not need the space. We have, we will be fine.
Okay.
And in fact, with taking out that language, we could also add a title.
Okay.
And the title would be Housing Recovery Bond. And then the ballot language would read, to aid recovery and provide affordable housing for low and middle income families, veterans, seniors, disabled, and other vulnerable populations, supportive housing for the homeless, and help low and middle income households purchase homes in their communities, shall the city of Santa Rosa's measure to issue.
We're using the $29 figure?
Yes, there should be $1 million number there.
What's the
124?
Is it
124 million.
$124 million in bonds, levying approximately
29 per 100,000.
No, there's $1 million there annually at approximately $29 per 100,000 of assessed value through final maturity, with oversight and audits be adopted. And I'll need some help in.
Okay, what's the second XX million?
That's the question. That's the annual.
That's the annual payment for the bonds. We have that number.
Do we have that number?
Let's fill in the gaps now. It's not on my chart. I don't have it on my chart.
While we wait for that number, I can give you, we'll need some corresponding changes to the Exhibit A.
Is it substantially, Exhibit A is, which page is Exhibit A?
It is.
Oh, I see, page 1 of Exhibit A.
Yeah.
All right.
In Section 2, the object and purpose of bonds, on the second line down toward the end, it'll be the object and purpose of which is to advance housing recovery, finance, and then proceeds on. So this adds the advance housing recovery.
And finance improvements?
Yes, and finance, yes.
Okay. The improvements here is housing?
Yes.
Okay.
And then on page 2 of Exhibit A, in Section 6, the accountability requirements.
Yes, same language.
Yes, down on E, the expenditures will be subject to oversight by an oversight committee, and the rest of that can remain the same since the Housing Authority is appointed by the City Council.
Paragraph A would have the advanced housing recovery. Specific purpose of the bonds is to advance housing recovery and finance the improvements.
And finance the improvements?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And we've located the annual debt service number for $29, and that is $8,616,304.
Will you please repeat that?
Sure. $8,616,304.
Okay.
And actually, the way this is written is approximately blank million. So if we do approximately 8.6 million.
Yeah.
That works. Okay. Are there any amendments or adjustments to Exhibit B?
No.
Okay. There's blanks there. Do we need to fill those blanks in?
Yes.
There's also $39.
It appears to say $39
there's a $39
instead of 29.
Okay, so there'll be 29.
So I'm on page 1.
Oh, and we also actually, there's going to be a number of changes. The tax rate, the election to authorize the sale of up to 124 million in bonds.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misread that. Okay, 124.
And then is 29 cents per hundred, or $29 per 100,000. Which the tax is anticipated to be collected is the final fiscal year. Oh, it doesn't need to be filled in now. Thank you.
Okay, so when
we will fill that in accordingly.
Staff to provide on August 7th as accurately as possible.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion I'm making on option A is, as we discussed, Oversight Committee, $29. The word recovery added, ballot language changed. So I'm going to make the motion as amended. At what point do I say you have the choice of the option A or B contingent on state law?
That's actually embedded in the embedded in Section 7 of the resolution.
Okay, so I'm reading the resolution now. Resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa determining that public interest and necessity demand the issuance of general obligation bonds for the acquisition and the improvement of affordable housing, submitting to the Santa Rosa electorate a measure to authorize general obligation bonds for affordable housing projects, and requesting Sonoma County to consolidate a bond election to be held on November 6, 2018, as amended. Waive further reading of the text.
I have a motion and a second. Your votes. And that passes with 6 ayes.
The resolution B, this is the option B, red line version with comparable changes and amendments. Okay, resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa determining that public interest and necessity demand the issuance of general obligation bonds for the acquisition and improvement of affordable housing, submitting to the Santa Rosa electorate a measure to authorize general obligation bonds for affordable housing projects, and requesting Sonoma County to consolidate a bond election to be held on November 6, 2018, as amended. Waive further reading of the text.
Second. Your votes? That has 6 ayes.
And the ordinance, I am reading the ordinance as originally presented to us.
Sorry.
I apologize. We need to redo that one.
Okay. We're going to re-vote on that one. We have a motion and a second. And yes, that has 6 ayes.
Okay. And I am reading the ordinance originally provided. An urgency ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa, amending Article 1 of Chapter 4-40 of the Santa Rosa City Code to authorize the issuance of general obligation bonds for the purpose of funding affordable housing, and waive further reading of the text.
Second. Your votes? And that has 6 ayes.
If I may clarify the request that staff bring back the guidelines along with the materials for the housing on August 7th. And thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. I appreciate the patience of everyone here watching the sausage being made. Thank you to the council. This is a hugely important milestone for the city. And item 15.1 has been continued to a date to be determined later. We have no written communications. We have no cards for final public comment. Nope. And we are adjourned.